So I've been reading some Nietzsche lately, and man, I just realized that the man struggled a lot. He struggled with severe migraines, vomiting, mental collapse, and I think he even went crazy toward the end of his life. And it really got me thinking about what would this type of person, this person who's so profound, who's known for writing these grand books with these grand ideas, what would he say to someone who is depressed and someone who is in pain and suffering? Because I know he never used that word depressed in his writings or anything, but he didn't really need to because he sort of lived it. I even recall a chapter in Thus Spake Zarathustra where Zarathustra, which is Nietzsche, who is Nietzsche, is actually in a state of dejection and despair. And I can only imagine for what Nietzsche suffered. He probably has a lot to say about suffering and depression in general. So in today's video, I want to specifically hone into like what Nietzsche would say to someone who's depressed. Like what is his guide for depression? Because I think about this topic a lot as someone who's struggled with it immensely throughout my life. And honestly, it's just something that always piques my interest. I like exploring these grand philosophers and what they have to say about depression. Okay, but before we get into what he actually has to say about depression and suffering, I first want to clear the air. A lot of people get Nietzsche wrong because they think he's this type of like nihilistic philosopher, this doom and gloom guy saying God is dead and everything's meaningless and all that nihilistic nonsense. Picture like an edgy teenager who's going through a phase who claims they understand Nietzsche just by reading some like Instagram quotes and all of a sudden, oh, they're a Nietzschean and I love Nietzsche and I love nihilism. It's sort of cringe to hear. Because if any of you have actually took time to understand Nietzsche and his philosophy, you would know that this couldn't be further from the truth. He's like the opposite of a nihilist. In fact, he has a chapter in Thus Spake Zarathustra called The Spirit of Gravity, where he condemns such people. But this begs the question, if he's not a nihilist, what does he actually have to say about suffering and pain, especially given the fact that he considers it non meaningless, that it's not meaningless? And I feel like it could be summed up in this one question. If pain is just going to happen no matter what do you actually do with it? Because whether I like it or not, we have to experience pain and suffering because it's just a part of life. Like we can't escape it. But the real question is, what is our approach? What are the paradigms that we have in our mind? And how do we perceive pain and suffering and what it does to us? And I feel like that's sort of what he gets at with his writing. So let's go ahead and take a look at what he actually has to say throughout his books and his writings about pain and suffering and depression. Okay, so the first excerpt we have is him saying, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." And what does he actually mean by this? He means to say that if you are struggling with depression or suffering or pain, you need to understand the why because you can't expect to bear the pain, to bear the depression if you don't have a why for getting up in the morning. And I know that's easier said than done. It's very hard to construct a why in the midst of depression because you just can't see a why. Like that's the whole point of depression. But you have to realize that there is actually a way out. There is actually a choice, at least according to Nietzsche, where you could rise above it by forcing yourself to reflect on the why, even if you can't see it. And he says that in doing this, you could bear almost anyhow. And notice how he says bear. He doesn't say escape. He doesn't say be free from. He says bear because he understands that in this life, you can't escape suffering. You can't escape pain. You can't, but what you could do is bear it. And that's something you have complete control over based on the paradigms and the mindsets you adopt. So he's urging you that even if you can't see why, even if that's the very essence of your depression, it's because you can't see a why for living, you still have to force yourself to find it because that's the only way out. Find it in the little things. It doesn't even have to be grand. Like why do you get up in the morning? Why are you going to eat food? Like ask yourself these questions. It doesn't have to be this grand fundamental teleological question of your why and your purpose in life. It could be in the little things and then you could work your way up from there. Okay, so the next quote we have here is that which does not kill us makes us stronger. And yes, I know this is a very cliche quote, and I don't necessarily agree wholly with it, but nonetheless, it still has its truths. But before we unpack what it actually means in the context of depression, we first have to understand the person behind this quote and what he's actually going through. Because here's the thing, Nietzsche's not just saying this in his philosopher's chair with his riches, money, and fame, sipping on wine and his woman. living a hedonic lifestyle. He's saying this as someone who's struggling immensely with migraines, with vomiting, with eye issues, with brain issues. He's saying this as someone who's literally going through it. So surely that has some amount of weight. And with that being said, in the context of depression, what does this actually mean? And I think this means that in your moments of depression, it's so easy to be biased towards the negative. And what I mean by that is when you're depressed, your perception of the world around you, of how you think, of the reasons for your living literally change, literally make you weaker. But he's saying, no, it doesn't have to make you weaker because you're not dead. And if you're not dead, there's always the option, there's always the ability to be stronger from it, if not physically, at least mentally. And he's saying this as someone who's literally growing weaker physically every single day. So I think what he's getting at is mentally, in terms of the perception you have about a situation. Because think about it for a second. In these moments of suffering, in these moments of depression, it literally gives us experiences that give us an immense amount of wisdom that literally make us stronger, provided that we are receptive to it. Of course, it doesn't come automatically. Like we have to purposefully find the gold in it that makes us stronger. But nonetheless, what he's saying here is that it can be found. It's an actual reality that there is gold in your depression, there is gold in your suffering to be found. And this gold, this jewels, the wisdom that you can get from it, it can definitely make you stronger. And the last quote I'll be talking about today is when he says, "No price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself." And I feel like in this case, he would say to you, if you're depressed, to own it, to not repress it, to view it as it is. Don't euphemize it. Don't try to pretend you're happy, but actually own it. Because it's in this very chaos, in these very moments where you give birth to a dancing star, which is also another one of his quotes. Because imagine if your suffering is meaningless. Imagine if your suffering isn't your own. That probably is going to make it all the more worse when you don't own up to it because it will just bite you in the back in the end. Like, for example, if you try to repress it, try to like not acknowledge that you are going through something, it's going to make it worse, right? Especially in the case of depression, that you can't just repress it down and try to make it go away because it's going to come back even stronger. I mean, if any of you read psychology, you probably know the concept of the shadow. Like it will come back stronger. All these repressed emotions will just come back to bite you in the back. And I think that's what he's getting at here when he's saying, own yourself. And there's no price that's too high, not even the depression, not even the suffering of owning who you are and owning what you're going through so that you could work your way through it and that it's so if I were to sum up what Nietzsche would pretty much say to someone who's depressed, it's this. It's to realize that suffering is not the end of the story. Suffering is also not fixed. Your depression is also not fixed. It's the content that makes your life unique. It's what gives birth, as he says, to that dancing star, that chaos within you that you have to hone in on, not necessarily because it's good, but because it makes you you. And it's only when you realize that you are what you are, that you're dealing with these things, can you move forward in life. And also, of course, to understand your why, because that's fundamental to depression, because it's literally in that state where you don't understand why. Why for anything? Why get up in the morning? Why eat food? Why persevere? Why push forward? And it's understanding that why that really gets you out of that abyss, gets you out of that pit. And that's what I would think Nietzsche would say. And obviously, this video is very superficial, right? I'm just pretty much giving you guys a few quotes and sharing my thoughts on it. But if you really want to hone in, you really want to enjoy the prose and the beauty of Nietzschean writing, I recommend all of you to read Thus Spake Zarathustra. And it's not depressing, contrary to popular belief. It actually is the opposite of that. When I was struggling and I really was just going through it, I sometimes would read some excerpts or like a few chapters on Thus Spake Zarathustra, and it honestly made me more strengthened. It invigorated me. And that's all I have to say. You know, Nietzsche is an amazing writer, and I think he would have a lot to say. So I recommend you all read him. Anyways, guys, leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Appreciate it. Bye bye.